You're worthless. My son deserves so much better than a barista with no ambition." The words came from Victoria Ashford's mouth like venom, delivered across the mahogany dining table at Sunday brunch. Around us, the country club's elegant restaurant fell silent. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward our table. My husband Preston sat frozen, his mimosa halfway to his lips. His sister Margaret looked down at her plate. I should have cried, should have argued. Should have made a scene that would confirm everything Victoria believed about me. Instead, I smiled. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, placing it gently beside her plate. "What's this?" she demanded, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over it. "Something for you to read later," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I stood, smoothed my dress, and kissed Preston's cheek. "I'll see you at home." Then I walked out of that country club with my head high, feeling those 50 pairs of eyes following me. The heavy doors closed behind me, cutting off the beginning of confused murmurs. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. My name is Bailey Winters, and I'm 28 years old. For 3 years, I'd been playing the role of the grateful daughter-in-law who wasn't quite good enough. I met Preston Ashford when he wandered into the coffee shop where I worked, looking for directions. He was charming, successful, and genuinely kind. We fell in love quickly. What Preston didn't know then was that I wasn't just a barista. I had a business degree from Northwestern, but after my father's death, I needed to work immediately to support my younger brother through college. The coffee shop job was temporary, a stepping stone while I planned my next move. Victoria never asked about my background. She saw the apron and decided she knew everything about me. She made assumptions about my education, my family, and my worth. I let her believe what she wanted while I quietly built something she never suspected. Behind my smile and my coffee-stained apron was a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. The envelope I'd left Victoria contained the first piece of my carefully constructed plan. Inside were documents showing that I'd recently purchased a 40% stake in Ashford Industries, not through Preston's money, but through my own investments. 6 months ago, I discovered Victoria's plan to force Preston into divorcing me. I found the emails on Preston's laptop when he left it open one evening. Victoria had been pressuring him relentlessly, threatening to cut him off from the family business if he didn't leave his worthless wife. She'd even lined up potential replacements, daughters of her country club friends with proper pedigrees. Preston had been resisting, but Victoria was wearing him down. That's when I stopped being defensive and started being strategic. I contacted every business rival Victoria had made over her 30 years of ruthless dealings. Turns out, a woman who treats people as disposable makes many enemies. They were very interested in helping me. My phone buzzed as I drove away from the country club. It was my business partner, Howard Chen. "The announcement just went live," he said. "Stock market's already reacting." I'd been working with Howard for 2 years, ever since I'd served him coffee and casually mentioned an observation about market trends. He'd been impressed enough to offer me a junior analyst position at his investment firm. I worked there on my days off from the coffee shop, learning everything I could about corporate finance. Victoria had no idea. She never asked what I did with my time. She assumed I spent my days shopping with Preston's money or watching television. Instead, I'd been building expertise, making connections, and waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity came when Ashford Industries needed capital for expansion. Victoria had made enemies of most traditional investors with her aggressive tactics. Howard and I stepped in with an offer she couldn't refuse. Well, she could have refused, but it would have meant bankruptcy. By the time I got home, my phone was flooded with messages. Preston had called 6 times. Margaret had texted twice, her messages confused and anxious. Even Victoria's assistant had reached out, asking if we could schedule a meeting. I ignored them all and made myself tea. Our home was a modern townhouse in the city, purchased entirely with Preston's inheritance from his grandfather. Victoria had tried to talk him out of buying it, insisting we should live closer to the family estate. Preston had stood firm on that decision, one of the few times he'd defied his mother. I was grateful for the distance now. I settled into the window seat overlooking the garden and opened my laptop. The industry news sites were already covering the story. "Mystery investor takes major stake in Ashford Industries," read one headline. "New board member shakes up family business," proclaimed another. None of them knew yet that the mystery investor was the worthless daughter-in-law. That revelation would come tomorrow. At the emergency board meeting Victoria would be forced to call. Preston came home 3 hours later, his face pale and confused. "Bailey, what's happening? Mom's freaking out about some investor buying into the company. She's demanding an emergency board meeting." I looked up from my laptop calmly. "I know, I'll be attending." He stared at me, not understanding. "Why would you be attending?" "Because I'm the investor, Preston. I own 40% of Ashford Industries now." The color drained completely from his face. He collapsed onto the sofa, his expensive suit wrinkling. "How? We don't have that kind of money." "You don't," I corrected gently. "I do. I've been working as a financial analyst for 2 years. The coffee shop was my morning job. I invested wisely, saved aggressively, and when your mother's company needed capital, I was ready." Preston's mouth opened and closed several times before he found words. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed your mother could be wrong about me if I'd just told you? Or did you need to see it?" Preston sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. "The emails, you found them, didn't you? The ones where Mom was pushing me to divorce you." I nodded. 6 months ago, you left your laptop open." "Bailey, I never agreed to it. I kept telling her no, that I loved you, that she was being unreasonable." "I know," I replied. "I heard you defend me multiple times, but I also watched you grow tired, watched her wear you down. Eventually, you would have given in to keep the peace. That's why I couldn't just talk to you about this. I needed to become undeniable." Preston ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from moments of stress. "What was in that envelope you gave Mom?" "Proof of share ownership. Documentation of her emails planning to destroy our marriage. Evidence of several questionable business deals she's made over the years. And notice of tomorrow's board meeting where I'll be introducing several new policies." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock Monday morning. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this moment. Not borrowed from Preston's money, but bought with my own earnings. The difference mattered to me, even if no one else would know. Ashford Industries occupied a sleek glass building downtown. I'd been there before for company parties, always as Preston's wife, always on the periphery. Today, I walked through the lobby as a board member, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floors. The receptionist's eyes widened when I announced myself. "Mrs. Ashford is here for the board meeting." The poor woman looked confused, glancing between her computer screen and my face. She'd probably been told to expect Bailey Winters, the investor, not Bailey Ashford, the worthless daughter-in-law. "Conference room C, top floor," she finally managed. Victoria was already there when I entered, surrounded by her longtime board members. Her face went through several expressions when she saw me: confusion, recognition, understanding, and finally fury. "What is she doing here?" Victoria demanded, looking at the other board members. "This meeting is for board members only." "I am a board member," I replied calmly, taking my seat at the table. "As of last Friday, I own 40% of this company. That gives me voting rights and a permanent seat on this board." I watched understanding dawn across the faces around the table. Several board members looked impressed. 2 looked worried, probably wondering how this change would affect their positions. Victoria's lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Pemberton, leaned forward. "Mrs. Ashford, might I ask how you acquired the capital for such a purchase?" "Through my work as a financial analyst for Sterling Investment Group over the past 2 years, combined with careful personal investments. Everything was properly documented and filed with the SEC. Would you like to see the paperwork?" I slid copies across the table. Victoria's hands shook as she picked up her copy. Her face went from red to white as she read through the documents. "This is impossible," Victoria whispered. "You're a barista, you serve coffee." "I did serve coffee," I corrected. "From 6 to 11 every morning. Then I went to my real job analyzing corporate investments and market trends. You never asked what I did with the rest of my day. You just assumed." The board member to my left, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, spoke up. "I remember you now. You presented the market analysis report at our investment conference last spring. Your predictions were remarkably accurate." "Thank you," I replied. "I spent considerable time studying this industry." Victoria found her voice again, sharp with anger. "This is a betrayal. You went behind our backs, behind Preston's back." "No," I said firmly. "You went behind my back planning to destroy my marriage. You sent emails to Preston pressuring him to divorce me. You lined up replacement wives like I was defective merchandise. I simply protected myself and my future. I pulled out printed copies of Victoria's emails, sliding them across the table. The other board members read them with growing discomfort. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat awkwardly. Victoria, these emails are problematic. They show clear intent to manipulate company succession for personal reasons. My son's marriage is my business, Victoria snapped. Not when you threaten to use company resources and inheritance as leverage, I replied. That's what you did. You told Preston he'd lose his position in the company if he didn't divorce me. That makes it a business matter. The room fell silent. Finally, Mrs. Patterson spoke again. What are your intentions, Bailey? You didn't purchase this stake just to make a point. You're right, I agreed. I have several proposals for the board to consider. First, I'm recommending we establish a merit-based promotion system rather than the current nepotism model. Second, we need to revise our vendor contracts. Several of our current agreements favor companies owned by board members' relatives at inflated prices. Third, I'm proposing we expand into sustainable product lines. A market analysis shows significant growth potential. Victoria's mouth fell open. You can't just waltz in here and change everything. Actually, with 40% ownership, I can propose changes. The board votes on them. That's how corporations work. I opened my presentation on the conference room screen. I spent the last 6 months analyzing every aspect of this company. Ashford Industries is profitable, but it's not reaching its potential. We're losing market share to competitors who are more innovative and less rigid in their thinking. For the next hour, I walked through my analysis. I showed inefficiencies in production, highlighted missed opportunities in emerging markets, and demonstrated how personal relationships had led to poor business decisions. The board members listened with growing interest. Several took notes. Even Mr. Pemberton looked impressed despite himself. Victoria sat in furious silence, watching her absolute control crumble. When I finished, Mrs. Patterson was the first to speak. This is the most thorough analysis I've seen in years. Bailey, I'd like to formally propose we create a Chief Strategy Officer position and offer it to you. 2 other board members immediately seconded the motion. Victoria finally exploded. Absolutely not. This is my company. This is a publicly traded company, Mr. Pemberton corrected quietly. You own 35%, Victoria. Bailey owns 40%. The remaining 25% is held by these other board members and outside investors. Technically, Bailey is now the largest single shareholder. The implications hung in the air. Victoria's face went pale as she realized what that meant. For 30 years, she'd been the majority shareholder and unquestioned leader. Now, in one strategic move, I'd become more powerful than her. Let's vote, Mrs. Patterson suggested. All in favor of creating the Chief Strategy Officer position and offering it to Bailey Winters Ashford. 6 hands went up. Only Victoria and her 2 oldest allies abstained. The motion passed. I accepted gracefully, negotiating a salary that reflected my actual worth rather than what Victoria had always assumed I was worth. As the meeting concluded, board members approached me with congratulations and business cards. They wanted to schedule follow-up meetings to discuss my proposals in detail. Victoria remained seated, staring at the table, her perfect composure finally shattered. Preston was waiting in the lobby when I came down. His mother must have called him during the meeting. Is it true? He asked. Are you really the Chief Strategy Officer now? Yes. I showed him my new business cards fresh from the printer. I start officially tomorrow, but I've been preparing for months. He shook his head in amazement. My mom's upstairs having a breakdown. She can't believe what just happened. She should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions, I replied. We walked to a nearby coffee shop, ironically the same chain where I'd worked for 3 years. Over lattes, I explained everything to Preston. How I'd discovered Victoria's emails, how I'd contacted Howard and built my investment portfolio, how I'd waited for the perfect moment to act. Why didn't you trust me with this? He asked, hurt evident in his voice. I did trust you, I said gently. I trusted that you loved me, but I also knew your mother's influence over you was strong. If I'd told you my plan, you would have tried to mediate, to find a peaceful solution. What's wrong with a peaceful solution? Preston asked. I sighed. Your mother doesn't do peaceful, she does domination. Any compromise would have been temporary. She would have waited and tried again, finding new ways to push me out. I needed to become someone she couldn't dismiss or eliminate. Preston was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee absently. All those mornings you left early, saying you had extra shifts at the coffee shop. I did work at the coffee shop, but only until 11. Then I went to Sterling Investment Group. Howard gave me flexible hours so I could do both jobs. You were working 16-hour days. Preston looked horrified. For how long? 2 years. It was exhausting but necessary. I needed the coffee shop income for immediate expenses and the analyst job to build my investment capital. Plus, working there kept your mother convinced I was exactly who she thought I was. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. You're incredible. I knew you were smart, but this level of strategic thinking. This is who I've always been, I interrupted gently. That evening, Victoria called. Preston answered, putting her on speaker at my nod. I want to talk to Bailey, alone, tomorrow morning at the estate. Her voice was cold, controlled. She'd recovered from her breakdown and was back in fighting mode. I'll be there at 9, I agreed. After Preston hung up, he looked worried. Are you sure that's safe? Mom's furious. I'm counting on it, I replied. The Ashford estate was a sprawling property outside the city, all manicured lawns and old money elegance. I'd been there dozens of times for family dinners and holiday gatherings, always feeling like an outsider looking in. Today, I arrived as an equal. Victoria met me in her study, a room designed to intimidate with its dark wood paneling and imposing desk. She didn't offer me coffee or a seat. What do you want? She demanded. I don't want anything I don't already have, I replied calmly. Respect, recognition, and my rightful place in this family and company. This was all revenge, Victoria accused. You manipulated your way into my company just to humiliate me. No, I corrected. This was survival. You were actively working to destroy my marriage. I protected myself, and honestly, I protected your company in the process. My proposals will increase profitability by at least 15% within 2 years. Victoria's laugh was bitter. You expect me to believe you care about Ashford Industries. I care about my future, which is now tied to this company. When I succeed here, the value of my shares increases. When the company thrives, Preston's inheritance grows. My success is literally invested in your family's success. This logic seemed to penetrate Victoria's anger. She sat down finally, gesturing for me to do the same. The board members were impressed with your presentation, she admitted grudgingly. Mrs. Patterson called it the best strategic analysis she'd seen in a decade. Because it is, I replied without arrogance. I'm good at this work, Victoria. I always have been. You just never bothered to find out. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the desk. Why the coffee shop? If you're so talented, why waste time serving lattes? My father died suddenly when I was 23, I explained. He had medical debts and my brother was starting college. I needed immediate income while planning my next move. The coffee shop provided that. It also taught me things business school never could about customer service, efficiency under pressure, and reading people. Victoria's expression shifted slightly. This was information she'd never bothered to learn about me. Preston never mentioned your father's death. Preston didn't know the details until recently. I don't advertise my struggles, I just handle them. Another silence fell between us. Finally, Victoria spoke again. I underestimated you, badly. Yes, you did. And now you own more of my company than I do. Yes, I do. Victoria's jaw clenched. What stops you from pushing me out entirely? With your 40% and the board members who clearly admire you, you could vote me out as CEO. I could, I agreed. But I won't. You built this company from nothing. You have institutional knowledge and industry connections I don't have yet. We're more valuable working together than fighting. Victoria studied me carefully, looking for deception. She wouldn't find any because I was telling the truth. You're proposing what exactly? A partnership? I'm proposing mutual respect, I replied. You stop treating me like I'm worthless. You stop trying to manipulate Preston's life. In return, I'll use my skills to help grow this company. We both benefit. And if I refuse, then we continue as we are. I hold my board seat, implement my changes, and slowly build enough alliances to diminish your influence. But that's exhausting for everyone and bad for business. I'd rather we found a better way. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out over her carefully maintained grounds. When she turned back, her expression was different, not warm, but calculating in a new way. Your market analysis mentioned expansion into sustainable products. I've been considering that sector for 2 years, but couldn't convince the old guard on the board. Because you approached it as a personal preference rather than a financial opportunity, I said. Let me present it with data. They'll listen. Over the next 3 hours, Victoria and I hammered out a working relationship. She would remain CEO with full operational control. I would serve as Chief Strategy Officer, focusing on long-term planning and new market development. We'd present a united front to the board and the family. Victoria agreed to stop interfering in my marriage to Preston. I agreed to consult with her before making major proposals to the board. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even warmth, but it was functional respect, which was more than we'd ever had before. As I prepared to leave, Victoria stopped me at the door. That envelope at the country club, the public humiliation, was that necessary? I met her gaze directly. You called me worthless in front of 50 people. You needed to understand that actions have consequences, even for someone with your power. Especially for someone with your power. Victoria nodded slowly. Point taken. The drive home felt surreal. I'd walked into that estate expecting battle and found instead a ceasefire that might eventually become peace. My phone rang as I pulled into our driveway. It was Margaret, Preston's sister. Bailey, I need to talk to you, Margaret said. Can I come over? 20 minutes later, Preston's sister sat in our living room looking uncomfortable. Margaret was 32, elegant and accomplished in her own right as a gallery owner. We'd always been cordial but never close. I owe you an apology, Margaret began. I sat silent at that brunch while Mom said those horrible things to you. I should have defended you. Why didn't you? I asked gently. Margaret looked down at her hands. Because I was afraid. Mom has this way of freezing you out if you don't fall in line. I watched her do it to Dad's sister years ago. I didn't want to be next. I understand that fear, I replied. It's why I couldn't just confront her directly. I needed leverage first. What you did was brilliant, Margaret said, looking up with admiration. Mom's been untouchable for so long. Watching her face when she realized you'd outmaneuvered her was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. We talked for another hour. Margaret shared stories about growing up under Victoria's controlling influence, how their mother's approval was always conditional and performance-based. She wasn't always like this, Margaret explained. When Dad was alive, she was softer. After he died, she threw herself into the business and became this corporate warrior. Success became her only measure of worth. That explains a lot, I said, but it doesn't excuse treating people as disposable. No, it doesn't, Margaret agreed. For what it's worth, I think you'll be good for the company, and good for Mom, even if she doesn't see it yet. She needs someone who won't back down. After Margaret left, Preston came home from his own office. He worked in architecture, having chosen a career outside the family business years ago. How did it go with Mom? He asked nervously. Better than expected. We've reached an understanding. I explained the arrangement Victoria and I had negotiated. Preston listened with growing relief. So you're not trying to destroy her or take over completely? Never was, I replied. I just needed her to see me as an equal instead of an obstacle. Preston pulled me close. I'm sorry I didn't stand up to her more strongly. I should have protected you better. You defended me when you could, I said. But some battles I needed to fight myself. This was one of them. Over the next 6 months, the transformation at Ashford Industries became evident. My sustainable product line launched successfully, capturing a younger demographic the company had been missing. The vendor contract revisions I'd proposed saved the company $2 million annually. Employee satisfaction scores increased after we implemented the merit-based promotion system. Victoria and I maintained our professional alliance. We didn't become friends, but we developed a working rhythm. She handled day-to-day operations and client relationships. I focused on strategy and innovation. Board meetings became productive rather than rubber stamp sessions for Victoria's decisions. The local business press noticed the changes. Articles appeared praising Ashford Industries' new direction. One featured a photo of Victoria and me together at a product launch, the caption reading 3 generations of Ashford leadership. Preston framed that article and hung it in our home office. Look at you, he said proudly. Chief Strategy Officer, my mom's partner. You've come so far from where you started. No, I corrected gently. I've come back to where I always was. Your mother just finally sees it. 1 year after that country club brunch, I attended the annual shareholders meeting. As Chief Strategy Officer, I presented the year's results and our 5-year strategic plan. The numbers were impressive. Revenue up 18%, profit margins improved, successful entry into 3 new markets. When I finished, the shareholders applauded. Several approached afterward to compliment the presentation and ask detailed questions about our plans. Victoria watched from the side of the room. As the crowd thinned, she approached me. "Well done," she said simply. "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Victoria spoke again, her voice quieter. "I've been thinking about what I said at that brunch, calling you worthless. It was cruel and untrue." "Yes, it was," I replied. "I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I judged you without knowing you. I made assumptions based on your job rather than your character or capabilities. That was wrong." It wasn't a full apology, but from Victoria Ashford, it was significant progress. "I accept that," I said. "And I hope you've learned that worth isn't determined by someone's current circumstances, but by their potential and character." Victoria nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "Lesson learned, though I wish you'd found a less dramatic way to teach it." "Would you have listened any other way?" I asked. She considered this honestly. "Probably not." That evening, Preston and I hosted a dinner party at our home. Victoria came, as did Margaret and several board members. The atmosphere was relaxed, celebratory even. As I looked around the table at people who once dismissed me, I felt satisfaction. Not from revenge, but from recognition. Victoria raised her glass for a toast. "To Bailey, whose intelligence and strategic thinking have transformed Ashford Industries and taught this old woman that worth isn't always visible on the surface." Everyone drank to that. Later, as guests departed, Victoria paused at the door. "That envelope you gave me at the country club, I still have it. A reminder not to underestimate people." "Good," I replied. "We all need those reminders sometimes." After everyone left, Preston and I stood on our balcony looking out at the city lights. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders. "Yes," I replied honestly. "Not because I proved your mother wrong, but because I proved myself right. I always knew my worth. Now everyone else does too." Kindly subscribe to our channel for more stories. Revenge with Dorothea. Bye for now.